everyone. Today, I'm delighted to be speaking with Richard Duncan. Richard is the executive director of the R.L. Mace Universal Design Institute. And I've invited him on the show so we can all learn a lot more about his work and what the Institute does and how it's relevant for our accessible housing needs and concerns. So, welcome to the show, Richard.
Thank you, Stephen. It's a pleasure being here. I look forward to our conversation.
So let's just get right into it. What is the Universal Design Institute?
Well, the R.L. Mace Universal Design Institute is a national nonprofit. We're based in Asheville, North Carolina. We were based in the central part of North Carolina, moved out here 6 years ago. And we work really in the area of built environment and products that work better for the wide range of the human condition, for everybody in society. Some people call it lifespan design. Lots of different names are applied to it, but it really is about improving the way the built environment works and supports the real people who live in our society.
So is it primarily a research-based group, or are you involved with developers in terms of helping them with projects? What is how does it manifest?
Yeah, we probably do some research as it supports perhaps policy development or consulting that we do around policy changes. But the work that we do includes things like design consulting. I've got a planning background. My degree is in planning, but I've worked with and alongside designers and all the stakeholders in kind of built environment and product development for many, many years. So I kind of have a foot in both camps. So we'll consult. For example, part of our work has to do with what I call the regulatory environment. So it has to do with compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act requirements, which is, all public and commercial buildings and spaces of public accommodation, that whole side of it. But it also includes compliance with the Fair Housing Amendments Act design and construction requirements, which is multifamily housing projects of 4 units or more. Both of those are very major pieces of national civil rights legislation that have a design expression to them as well. So we do regulatory stuff and consulting in that area. We consult on product design and development with product manufacturers. And then in a kind of other hat has to do with our work consulting with the non-regulatory stuff, which is really 1, 2, and 3 family housing in that whole environment that isn't really subject to federal laws or in most cases state requirements from the building code. So consulting in all those areas. We do a lot of educational work as well, a lot of webinars. We've been Zooming like crazy, like everybody else, over the past couple or 3 years, and Zoomed more than I care to remember. But I've held lots of webinars, and before that, of course, and since then, we're beginning to do some face-to-face things as well. But for audiences that include consumers, that include policymakers, elected officials, various of the stakeholders, kind of in this whole area of whether it's regulatory or in just in housing that doesn't involve regulation. So that's it: policy development, consulting, educational stuff.
So that's really cool. So can you give me an example of a more or less typical type of client that would approach you or that you would be getting in contact with, and what specifically guidance you might give them specifically around housing?
Yeah, you mean so like not multifamily stuff, not
Sure. Let's
regulatory
start
stuff?
with
Yeah.
let's start with the non-regulatory, the non-government involved stuff.
Yeah, all right. So there's kind of 2 expressions of housing these days. One huge area of activity is in the remodeling side. Something like 90+% of all the housing that's out there doesn't have significant features that can accommodate folks with a range of disabling conditions. And so we've run those kinds of programs. We've funded, thousands of ramps. And we've consulted with folks who are and then trained people who are doing this. So we helped the National Association of Home Builder get their CAPS training going 20 odd years ago, which is kind of the biggest well-known national program very introductory to get people with their toe in the water of how do you remodel a house with home accessibility modifications. We also developed for them the kind of follow on to that, which is related to universal design, which we should talk about those differences. And it's called, I think, Universal Design Essentials now, that takes it from a perspective of not the customized responses, which are really required if you're doing a home access modification for a particular individual's needs, but how do you remodel generically, or even better, in my opinion, new construction in a way that's generically more useful but highly marketable. So high function homes that also can appeal to a wide audience.
So that raises all kinds of questions for me. So the first thing is, are you familiar with the work of Louis Tenenbaum and HR 7676?
For sure, he's my good buddy.
Oh, awesome. So for my listeners who may not have listened to that episode, earlier in the year, I interviewed Louis Tenenbaum, who is who is a has a contractor background and is helping to promote federal legislation to make it possible for people to use their 401ks to get a tax break to help remodel their homes for accessibility. That's very simplified, but that's the general guts of it. And I think that touches on the kind of work you do, right? In the single
Oh,
family home space.
sure, sure. So to kind of speak around that a bit and provide some context, I've mentioned that most of the homes that we live in, and especially the homes we're growing old in, right, weren't built with an older generation in mind, or for people with any kind of disabling condition in mind. So we're faced with the prospect of living, smaller and smaller and more limited lives, more dangerous lives, or renovating if possible. That's usually people's first option. How do you renovate your house? And that whole process has its own confounding and challenging aspects. How do you find a remodeler that knows what they're doing, or a designer that knows what they're doing? You're always taking money that's allocated for something else, right, to make your home access renovation. No one's ever said, well, I'm saving my money for that good looking ramp I've always wanted. Well, that just, it rarely happens, right? So
Yeah.
all kinds of challenges. And there are options about how you can tap resources. Fortunately, unfortunately, if you have a lower income or a particular disabling condition where your health concern might be funded by an organization that's dedicated to managing that. United Cerebral Palsy being just one example of many other options. So if you fit one of those categories, you might be able to get some help. If you're a kind of middle income or above, you're taking resources you have and trying to make something of it, without a whole lot in the way of tax deduction, unless you have a medically necessary access. You can take it off your taxes. These days, with the high deductible, that's a little bit less available. What Lewis is
Yeah.
trying to do is to tap another source, the potential source, to fund some of the things, to allow, a lot of it these days. So the dominant demographic is the aging demographic, right? So
Right,
allow
of
older
course.
folks, in particular, with these retirement funds, to remain in their home, so where they can age hopefully independently and safely for as long as possible.
Right, right. I just did an interview with someone who runs a PACE program here in
Mm-hmm.
California, which is a national program in most states to
Mm-hmm.
allow seniors to be able to stay in their homes, and especially low-income seniors to stay in their
Mm-hmm.
homes. And some of their funding goes towards accessibility modifications in their home.
Mm-hmm.
Have you guys advised agencies that are PACE agencies for supporting their clients much?
We haven't advised them. The PACE program here, for example, where we are, does that. It also, as you know, and you probably talked about in your other podcast, it has extravagantly comprehensive medical service, which I
Oh
find is
my God,
just
yeah.
very remarkable and highly commendable.
And very community oriented and very
Yeah,
holistic. Yeah.
right, right.
So
Just a wonderful program.
how would people even know that you exist? So you've got I know you said you spoke to the National Association of Home Remodelers, so to get the word out about your services that you can offer them. But apart from something like that, how do contractors and especially general contractors who are building, say, let's suppose I'm a GC, and or excuse me, let's suppose I'm a real estate developer and I want to I have this plot of land. I'm going to put up 20 or 30 or more homes. How would I know to talk to you or an agency like yours? How does that happen?
Well, the agency like mine might be the catch to that, but so we're you know I call us accurately a national nonprofit because we do work all over the country and have for many years, um, but we don't necessarily push what I would say is the traditional retail marketing and sales agendas of folks. For example, I'll take a different example, but get back to yours, Stephen. Um, we don't, as I say, do retail in the single family housing area, or we don't push retail. We do 3 or 4 homes a year for folks who find their way to us. Some of them are local, some of them are not quite so local, and we do anything from design programming at the front end. We visit them, we listen to them, we take pictures and measurements, and we give them back a design program which says, this is what I thought I heard you say, this is what I think you should be thinking about doing. And if they're local, I can recommend remodeling and contracts, or we can go into help with specification of products and so on. That's really to keep our hand into this, because we talk about this stuff so much. I want to keep fresh, but we found that from a business model perspective, it's not that feasible for us. There are other folks, some folks in major metro areas, let's say, that are do remodeling, and they're kind of exclusively finding this niche. You need that critical mass of population. Other architects and designers, less commonly, who have made this their speciality. Some of those folks can work nationally for that, but a developer would kind of have to stumble across us. We have our 2 websites. I'll talk about our 2 organizations in a little while. Our 2 institutes, actually. So we have those out there, and we're on social media. We're on LinkedIn. We're in Facebook, and a couple other things. So you could find us there, but we don't make any special efforts to push out to that audience necessarily. We've tried it in the past. We might in the future, but a lot of our work these days, as you might understand, comes by word of mouth. We work for folks, and they recommend someone else, and it works this way. But we do work for some developers and have done that. Again, we have repeat business from a lot of folks who come by. We're small,
Oh,
we're
yeah.
yeah.
So you mentioned something about there was an allusion to the fact that you might be a little bit of a unicorn, a bit of a unique agency. Are there in the country, are you aware of any other nonprofits or even for-profit agencies that do what you're doing or anything like it?
Well, uh, yeah, I guess we are a little bit of a unicorn. So I mean, uh, educational, university-based groups have had some focus in this area. I mean, where I was at NC State for many years, we had the Center for Universal Design. That was the main focus of this. This is where the guy R.L. Mace worked. He founded that center, and he's really considered the father of universal design in this country. Um, at the University of Buffalo, there's a center that's been in business for even longer. It does a bunch of different things, but it includes universal design as well. There are the occasional practitioners, and really occasional. I would love to get together a national registry, Stephen, of folks who are really expert in this, and it's kind of catch as catch can. You mentioned Lewis. He's now got his institute focused on these kind of forward-thinking funding mechanisms to make this happen. And a lot of the other groups, because it's difficult to kind of sell the universal design. We can talk about that challenge later on as a viable business model. A lot of folks ground all of their work in the accessibility world, which still has a viable business model, the regulatory environment kinds of stuff. And then when they can, they do some universal design stuff, which again is still finding its way in terms of being something that the marketplace has fully embraced and the customers are running towards in great numbers.
It's funny you mentioned that. Last year, I interviewed an architect and a nonprofit developer that are trying to create here in California a universal design standard.
Mm.
It's an agency. It's called the Kelsey, and if people want to look that up, that interview I did with them, and also I did an interview with a prominent Bay Area an architect who specializes in accessible design, who was working on their board to help them to develop these universal design standards. Do you think that we can get to a point in time where we will have a universal design standard to compete with, say, for example, the LEED designation for energy
Mm,
efficiency in homes?
mm. Wouldn't that be nice? Yeah.
Yes.
Um, we're a little jealous of LEED for that reason, aren't we? Because because they've been around for a long time and have the various energy crises to kind of feed the beast for that, which is all good. In fact, there have been various attempts at times that I haven't been able to be that big a part of to kind of have LEED go sideways more than they do now to embrace what we consider to be. I mean, universal design is in fact a kind of sustainability element as
Absolutely.
well, and it marries the social sustainability, which is where we're at root, with certain elements of actually environmental sustainability as well. So I think that there's some common cause there. But yeah, so there are a lot of folks out nationally who have developed over time, including us, any number of times, design standards, design criteria, guidance around. And this is, I'm talking particularly about housing, right? But
Right.
we can talk about other areas too, because housing is the area that has the farthest to go, right, in terms of where
Yeah.
they're at now, where they need to be. So there's a lot of that out there. We've got ours, as I said, that's our Better Living Design Institute was really set up to promote universal design in the 1, 2, and 3 family housing sector, that which is strictly market based. So we've got our criteria, and we can hook people up on via our website later on for that. It would be wonderful to have, all of the stuff that's out there now nationally in housing is really grounded mainly in accessibility provisions, which is fine. But the issues with that are that too often it's rendered in a kind of rudimentary way, and so you've got houses that look different, outside and inside, from what people might regard as their standard homes. And a universal house has got to look the same. If it looks weird and different, it better be because of the paint color, because it's not going to work if the universal housing you're trying to promote, that we know works for everybody, looks so radically different from all the other houses in the neighborhood that it sticks out like a sore thumb. So it's got to have that kind of appeal to it, and that's what we're looking for: is inside and outside, much higher function, yet with an appeal that's marketable to young households and old. We're not there yet, right? In terms of getting that launched and in a robust way nationally. Maybe your podcast can help us get interest from
Well, wouldn't that be
deep
lovely?
pocketed funders. Yeah.
Um, um, so you mentioned before a challenge in promoting universal design. Let's talk a little bit about that. What is your challenge around around the universal design concept and getting it acceptable in the environments in which you work?
Okay, so we've done, I think, by one count I made recently, about 38 different demonstration projects nationally about with universal housing, and we love demonstration homes because they have all kinds of value while they're being built, as they're going up, as they're open to the public, and so on, uh, to promote the idea, to get people interested, and hopefully draw others into the field. And those have all been successful as far as they've gone. In some cases, um, the builder we've been working with or others have said, this is an interesting idea. I hear all these numbers about the numbers of folks with disabilities. Then more recently, it's about the growth in the older population. I'm going to try this out. And too often these trials that they do, and it's all pretty tentative usually, right? Because most builders are small time builders and they don't have, $10 million advertising budgets. And if they don't sense this, if I build it, they'll come kind of response, they're not likely to stay engaged in this. And this is part of the problem, is that if you're a younger household, it's just not among your selection criteria. And if someone's doing it right, and there's all kinds of problems with this, people can build it right and market it badly. If you say, oh, there's a nice universal design home, perfect for grandma. Well, even grandma doesn't want to live in a home designed for grandma. But we found out about older adults is we are entirely resistant to the reality of our aging, and
Absolutely.
completely
I feel it
resistant to
myself.
Yeah, well, yeah, for sure. Well, you and I know a little better, so hopefully we can make some better choices. But in terms of our housing, um, but that sector, which we thought, boy, they beat a path to the door of builders who are doing this kind of stuff. Either the marketing was wrong, or they were in this advanced state of denial, which so many people are. We don't want to accept the reality of our aging selves and how it reflects our housing, even though we've seen our parents go through it, older relatives go through it, friends and colleagues go through it. We still don't get the message, so we just say the following thing. We say, well, I'll do something when I need to. Well, you won't. You'll do something a year or 5 years after you needed to, and it could have made a difference. And we're just culturally not attuned to that kind of advanced thinking. So, universal housing, with a couple of exceptions, hasn't taken hold. One area where it has taken hold is in the area of age-targeted, age-restricted housing. 40 years ago, developers of those kinds of projects were building way too many of them that looked just like the homes people were leaving. It just
Yeah.
happened to be all older folks living there, right? Nowadays, they finally got the message, I think, as a result of the marketplace, they need to be designing them somewhat more accommodatingly. So that sector has come along, but the mainstream housing sector, if the building code doesn't make you do it, if fair housing doesn't make you do it, you have a hard time cutting. There are some exceptions, but in general, we haven't seen this gigantic movement of consumers and their demand, right, forcing builders to change how they build homes in a very robust and long-standing way.
So you do work in many states, right?
Yeah.
Are you in all the, what states, and I want to get into the issue of regulatory, like multi-unit housing now. In what states do you find the most openness by government and policymakers and bureaucrats to what you're trying to educate them about? What states are better and which states are worse in terms of that? Or is it all the same? The reason I ask you this, this is a
Yeah.
preface. The reason I
Yeah.
ask you this is interviewing people all over the country. I've heard both horror show type interactions with government officials, and I've also heard really positive, progressive, in the context of what we're talking about, government policy and bureaucratic interest. So that's why I'm asking you.
So this is in the multifamily area specifically?
Yeah, where there's government money, multifamily housing,
Oh,
which usually has government money. You're brought in to be a consultant. How,
yeah.
because we have the fair housing law, like you talked about, that sets a minimum standard, but you're trying to create a much more holistic, even at design stage, thinking around access. And I'm just wondering what you've experienced out there in terms of the good and the bad and the ugly.
Yeah. So a little bit of a clarification. So certainly when you have federal money like HUD money in its various
Yeah.
iterations that comes down through perhaps the state level or directly to a locale, when that money is used to create a whole bunch of different kinds of housing, including multifamily, yeah, that design standards append to that usually that are very similar to what we'd see in the Fair Housing Act design and construction standards in general. So, so when that money comes along, there is special attention that has to be paid to that. And there's not that many options. So you can have a helpful or non-helpful regulatory environment. They've really got to do it. The good thing about fair housing is that it doesn't matter what the funding source is. All private sector multifamily housing also has to comply with these same regulations. So you could have, a 4 unit project or a 400 unit project. They've all got to comply with this equally, whether or not there's any extra money and whether or not it's rental or owned,
So
condominium or rental, same thing.
So I just want to back up and clarify something. I was always under the understanding, perhaps incorrectly, that if there was HUD money involved, the ADA came into play because of the
Mm,
existence of federal money. Is that not
mm.
true?
Well, kind of. So, I'd have to go back in my memory banks here, but even before the ADA came along, I think that federal money in housing probably brought with it special design considerations,
I'm
because
sure. Yeah.
those things existed prior to ADA. ADA came along in 1990. Um,
Yeah.
and these days, I'm kind of working on a project now that is pulling in some federal requirements, not from funding. There is some flexibility because you have, without getting too deep in the weeds, you have several different kind of guidelines that could be pointed to with this, and one of them these days is, people say, well, you could substitute the ADA and its housing side provisions, A units, B units, and C units, and so on, for what might otherwise be applicable. But yes, so the broad picture is that if you got federal money, you're likely to have some special and perhaps additional requirements for accessibility in the units or in a portion of the units that you're building compared to, let's say, a private sector project. But the private sector projects, because of the Fair Housing Act, the floor is fairly high for that,
Mm.
so it is. So to answer your question, I don't have the national perspective you're hoping I would have on that. That's what I'll say. I don't.
That's quite all right.
Yeah, I haven't plumbed the depths of the regulatory environment and enforcement on the state level, for example, comparing Montana to California to Massachusetts. I know that certain states were way ahead of the game in adopting state regulations, California being one of them, Massachusetts, where I worked before, being another one, North Carolina, where I am now, was another one that
Yeah.
was ahead of the game back in the 70s, kind of
Right.
trying to adopt this. I don't know that that's necessarily conveyed a particularly high-mindedness of its enforcement officials, but there are challenges that can come up in a lot of ways.
So I want to ask you about something a little different.
Yeah.
Have you noticed in your work any new emphasis or new change since you've been doing this, or since the Universal Design Institute has been doing its work around technology? And just to give you some context, I've been doing a lot of interviews on the show with people in the IDD world, intellectual and developmental disabilities world, who
Hmm.
are now, for the purpose of providing adequate support to clients when it's so hard to find skilled labor to do that work,
Mm.
are turning more and more to remote support services or enabling technology. I've done several podcast interviews about that. And I also see how smart home technology is changing not only the way I interact with my own home, but also
Hmm.
what I'm seeing in new track development, where they promote the fact that it is what Alexa enabled or smart home enabled, and they promote it in a marketing way. In your work, do you see any of the impact of technology as it pertains to universal design happening? Do you touch on that at all?
Yeah, yeah. Yes, indeed. I do several webinars on home tech, and there's a video coming out in January where we talk about home technology. And again, the dominant demographic that we focus on these days, just because, is the older
Right.
households. And I don't know as much about the specific enabling technology you just referenced. I'd love to know more. I should listen to that podcast. Um, um, but it is a huge area. I mean, so just to take one of the issues that you brought up, and we have this period of great transition in our demographics over the next 40 years, as we're maturing to what hope will be the permanent shape of our demographic. With, when you're born, you have a really good chance of living to an old age. Now we're kind of discombobulated. We got more and more older folks and not enough
Yeah.
caregiving age people coming
Oh,
behind
yeah.
us. And so
It's
the whole
absolutely a
issues of
crisis.
caregiving for any people with support needs, whether they're adults with an IDD label or whether they are older adults who don't want to do stuff or can't do stuff for
Right.
themselves. What we think of is that the house design is the first stop in reducing caregiving needs and enhancing independence and autonomy. Um, but home technology can come in as an infill to a lot of the areas where even the home environment can't quite make the difference, or make the difference in the long term. So we do look at that closely, and all these voice control devices. Who saw that coming? I didn't see that coming 20 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Um, and and all the rest of this stuff. I mean, smart appliances, all the areas, home security, lighting, heating and ventilating, entertainment, communications, all that stuff all has a component right now you could get into your house that could let you control a whole lot from chair side or bedside, whatever the case might be, or from around the block or across the country for that matter, right? It's all
Yeah.
Wi-Fi enabled, internet enabled. One of the issues we have as we think about this is that is two things. That it doesn't seem to be a lot of home tech out there now that's focused on, I'll say, kind of like the 60 to 75-year-old age group. We might think of them as kind of the young old.
Yeah.
I'm in that group. I'm in that group. Um, uh, so that we're, at least if it's out there and if it's marketed to that age group, I haven't seen it. So we're kind of adapting and adopting whatever's been out there for general marketing purposes to fine tune them to our needs. And there's a lot of needs, as I said, that you could use this for. The other thing that comes up time and again for time immemorial is this slower adoption and lower adoption rate of technology by older adults. And this is definitely an age cohort thing, right?
Right.
My age cohort's a lot more likely to be adopting this stuff than the one that preceded us, but less likely than the one that's following us, right? So
Absolutely.
that's a challenge, is knowing that the tech is out there and that it can be quite pricey, as you know. You can spend a lot of money on this stuff. Some of it's more available. You've got to have, internet and Wi-Fi and a smart device of some kind. That's generally the trifecta. Once you've gotten over that hurdle, you can go low end for some of these voice control things that can be fun, but then you can get lots of scaling, right? You can scale those things up radically with lighting controls and getting apps downloaded on your phone that can control a lot of things you can acquire and purchase.
Yeah.
Do we like home tech?
Yeah. Well, I could ask you six or seven more questions and go for another half an hour, but we're kind of out of time. So I did want to ask you if people want to learn more about the Design Institute or the other website you mentioned, how can they do that?
Yeah, thank you for asking. So the Universal Design Institute is the umbrella organization. We're the official
Okay.
501c3, and it handles all the regulatory stuff as well as the home accessibility stuff. And that's udinstitute.org, right? Just you can
Uh-huh.
Google the name or stick that into your URL place. The Better Living Design Institute is the other institute, which is betterlivingdesign.org, which
Uh-huh.
focuses just on 1, 2, and 3 family housing and really promotes universal design specifically to that housing sector. And each of those websites has tons of downloads in all topic areas that we've talked about.
Wonderful. Well, I appreciate that. I'll put that in the show notes. And I really appreciate your time talking to me about this. It's been fascinating.
Stephen, it's a pleasure. I will certainly tune in to future podcasts, and I wish you well.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too. Bye.